G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a brilliant weekend no matter where you are in the world and no matter what you are doing. Now today, as always, well, not as always, we actually don't have as much as usual, but we do have some very interesting bits and pieces to go across. So we're going to look at a few map updates working off some geolocations of footage that has come out. Also, some of that footage actually then verifies, I'll say, some information that we got sent now, some say 5 or 6 months back. We need to look at some drones, we need to look at some weapons being used. Now, what we do need to talk about is the long-range strikes that we have really thought was going to get signed off in the US, between the UK, the US, either for the Storm Shadow Scalp or ATACMS, and no decision has actually been made on those long-range strikes, and Starmer is on his way back to the UK. We thought that was going to be going through, but we're going to be talking about Russia's red lines, nuclear weapons, and where I think there is some misunderstanding about escalation of war because people are looking far too small at great state war, not at then proxy war into the future, and how great states may not ever actually go head to head, but how they can fuel battles behind the lines in proxy wars everywhere in the world, or in many different corners of the globe. So we'll speak about that. Now, where should we start? Let's have a look at the maps straight off the bat and have a look at what is going on. So here is Ukraine in the center. Here is the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, purple since 14, green and blue area recovered by Ukraine within its borders, or occupied by Ukraine when we talk about the Kursk Oblast. Now, what I will say straight off the bat, and don't click off yet, we do have some good stuff coming up, is Deep State and Syriac, both the primary maps that I use, have not updated. We have a couple of Noel reports maps, but basically none of the maps today, just by sheer coincidence, have not updated. But where we'll swing down, we'll come down into Kursk and have a look here. Now, as you know, Deep State was never really keeping up in here, even on the Ukrainian game. So we'll go across onto then the Noel reports map. Now, what we can see is he has updated to show the Russian push down into Sneggost. Now, this is what I want to talk about here. So we saw this footage come through then yesterday afternoon, my time, so about 18 hours ago for you, or 24 hours once you see this video, of a Russian soldier here putting up then Russian national flag, the flag of the airborne units, and this flag here, which is then the Wagner PMC flag. Now, in Kursk, when Kursk first started pushing across, we did get videos coming out from said to be Wagner fighters saying that they were coming back from Belarus to fight here. So could it be those fighters that when Wagner had its uprising back into Russia, that then went across to Belarus to train the Belarusian soldiers, did they come back across into Kursk as well? But we have spoken about more senior elements working with specifically the VDV airborne paratroopers as a force multiplier to give on the ground C2 and C4S as well. So this was back in April 19th of a guy fighting in Ukraine for the Ukrainians. The VDV are led by Spetsnaz. They're in small teams utilizing hit and run tactics along the joint fires capability, and it's working well, and they're gaining ground fast. Small, hard, fast teams in and out. Something Ukrainians should be doing, and that's what I would do. The Russians are constantly learning and amending their tactics. Now, I know here it says Spetsnaz, but what I would take out of this to line up with what I shown on that photo and what I said on my Telegram there was with more senior units. Now, Wagner PMC has a lot of very senior guys who are ex-Spetsnaz or ex-highly experienced. And then when we saw Bakhmut, a lot of people got a bit of a misunderstanding due to the conscription or volunteering of prisoners to then work as bulk forces for Wagner as well. But your full-timers who have been through Syria or Ukraine or this or that have a lot of conventional military experience in the military and a lot of experience now on the ground if they've survived those rotations. So that is what I spoke about maybe 3 or 4 days ago. And that is, I think, being further confirmed by that, or at least I'm going to then claim it. So where that was then geolocated to is in Sneggost just here. So we'll have a look at where this is showing on the Deep State map of the grey zone in here. So just down on the road. So we're talking just in where my cursor is here. So as you can tell, that map hasn't updated to show this, but NOAA reports does show that within Russian-controlled territory here as well. So we have a few more updates to talk about while we are in Kursk. Now, Ubakovka is somewhere we need to speak about. That is where, or at least in the direction of where we saw that Ukrainian engineering vehicle with the bulldozer front on it pushing through the dragon seat and the tank coming up behind. Now, one thing which people I think are getting wrong in here is they're mistaking Ubakovka for Lyubimovka. So this is Lyubimovka in here, where we know by some other claims of maps, they're claiming the Russians are close to Lyubimovka. Now, some are saying it's getting mistaken of where the Ukrainians and Russians are fighting. It's Ubakovka. Now, if you have a look straight down from Vesely in here, Ubakovka is just to the south of here. We jump onto the Noel reports this map. Now, we see this Vesely. This is Ubakovka down in here. So, different area. I've seen other maps showing arrows in all sorts of fucking places. It doesn't line up because it's not the right area. Now, Noel had this map as well, showing a Armed Forces of Ukraine presence in Vesely in the direction of Ubakovka here. This is actually, I believe, sooner than the map he's showing right here. So I'm not exactly sure if this is presence or what is actually holding in here. I don't have enough geolocations other than some crossings on the border and some speculation about firefights to exactly know what has actually occurred in here. But we have this as well from Konstantin, who first spoke then about Russia's offensive, the VDV, on the first couple of days in here too, that Ukraine successfully taken back Ubakovka in the Kursk region with minimal losses, but we lost one M113 on a mine. Unfortunately, I don't know the fate of the crew. So there has been definitely some fighting back and forth around this location. What exactly is happening in here? Unsure. If you were to ask me what is Ukraine trying to do in here, if it was a larger tactical or strategic move, potentially get to Glashkovo to try and cut this into then an east and west element with Tetkino, where we have seen Ukraine cross in here as well, because I believe that Russia is trying to push down in here, not only to take back some territory, but also reintroduce then those lines of logistical supply from Kotonovo down into this area that is being isolated due to the bombing of the bridges of the Sime River. So it may not be a full offensive to take it back, just open back up those G-locks to try and get shit back into here. Now, Zelensky has spoken about Kursk as well. Now, President Volodymyr Zelensky, accidentally closed that one, at the Yalta European Strategy on September the 13th, this is being reported by the Kyiv Independent, he said, in the Kursk direction, the Russians have started their rapid offensive and they want to use about 60 to 70,000 people there. We know about 40,000 people who are there. So again, we don't have that information available to us to check from the photographs, videos we have seen, the drone footage of those moving in. It's nowhere near that amount of numbers, but again, we don't have all the information that may be available either. But in a conventional offensive to take back that amount of land and the amount of Ukrainian forces that are, we believe, that are in Kursk, that seems about reasonable numbers if Russia was to then have to amass to push back out. They wanted to make a quick breakthroughs. They are doing it, but they have not seen any serious success yet. To be fair, I will say this area that has been taken back in 3 to 4 days. This is fairly serious success when you're talking about 10% of what has been taken from Kotelnovo down to Snagost, especially if the Russians can get into somewhere like Lyubimovka as well. But again, wait and see with any of this. The situation in Pokrovsk, one of the major goals of Russia's ongoing offensive Donetsk, has been gradually stabilizing over the past week, Zelensky says. According to Zelensky, before the Kursk operation, Russian fired 12 shells against 1 Ukrainian in Donetsk Oblast. Now the ratio is 1 to 2.5 Russian shells to every single Ukrainian shell down in there. Now I will say we can't see in the maps today, but the movements we have seen down near Krasnohivka, which I'm calling this whole area in here, the Pokrovsk front, it is far from stabilized in the past few days when we look at then the open source maps like this, and this map is very conservative to those gains. I'd say it's actually further accelerating in here as well. So if Russia has amassed those 60, 70, 40,000 troops, whatever, in Kursk, obviously it hasn't been taken from this area at the front. It may have been taken from littered other spots or reserves, but from looking at what we're looking at Donetsk, it doesn't look like that has occurred. Now, speaking in Kursk, one thing that we see a lot of the Russian pages sharing and speaking about, and videos coming out, is the increase of much larger, more high-tech drones. Now, these much larger drones are, of course, highly susceptible to air defense. Bigger system, bigger cross-section, but these drones can drop things like an anti-tank guided munition, like it's coming off this drone here. Now, some pages are saying this is a Russian forepost, others are saying it's Orion. I don't care either way. The reason I bring it up is larger drones being used in the Kursk Oblast, and what the Russian pages are saying about this is that the Russians can use these due to the lack of air defense given, and that capability inside of Kursk has allowed them to use those larger drones to better effect. These drones, of course, if they would cross over in occupied or in Ukrainian territory, would be highly, highly susceptible to being shot down. So it gives us an idea about the overlapping of air defense that may be present or not present within Kursk. Now, that footage I just showed you was just in around here. So we'll get you an idea of where this is sitting. So we have a look at this Novovkia in here, just above in here where that drone is operating. Now, further on, we have just two more things to look at. I want to come down into Ukrainsk to have a look at some footage as well. This is Ukrainsk down in here. Now, we know this is an area of a lot of fighting. Surak is saying that the majority of this is under control or grey zone. We've seen geolocations in here too. And then we see this footage come out today of a lot of close combat. Now, this is off a Russian helmet camera here too. What the interesting part of this is then geolocation of where they are storming Ukrainian positions. Now, if we have a look, it's right about here where my cursor is, where that is geolocated to. Now, it doesn't mean that everything in here is captured, but if there's presence of soldiers, should at least be grey zone in the whole area through Ukrainsk here, should definitely be grey zone here off that footage. If you want to watch that footage, I'll chuck it in the Telegram as soon as I get off here. Now, let's talk about, or let's quickly look at drones. This is just something interesting I've seen, is drones being used for resupply. And we know some of this has been happening. I think furthermore, we will see more and more of this. And you can see some, what looks like water bottles being dropped here by a Russian drone crew to Russian forces, I believe that video. And these are believed to be Russian forces here, filling up like your 1.5 litre bottles. How many ounces that is, I have no idea in freedom units, and then putting like a 700 ml bottle in it, covering it with foam so the bottle will actually then survive the fall. Resupply, rotation, where you're moving back and forward from zero lines, second lines, third lines, is incredibly dangerous in drone warfare. I think we'll see more and more of supply done like this. And I've spoken to a lot of guys who are saying the only way to get supply in some areas is looting enemy that you have killed or friendlies that have been killed as well. That interview will be coming. Actually, I don't know if it'll ever come. It's one of those ones. I hold on to a number of interviews that are, if I ever get killed, reach out to my family, here's numbers, and then see if you want to release or if you can release or not the interview there. Now, what we're going to talk about is these long-range strikes. Now, I would have been, if I was a betting man, I would have put money that, yep, realistically, as we've seen other things move, we're going to see these strikes, at least the weapons, open up to be able to be used by Ukraine. And it doesn't look like there's been really any budge on this. And from the White House, in a meeting with the Prime Minister, so Keir Starmer of the UK, this is from the White House press. How much do you think there, and what approach will be concerning threats that Putin has been made, explaining concerns of West if weapons made available to Ukraine to go deeper in Russia? The kind of rhetoric is dangerous, but it's not new. It's not new for Russia. Now, so many people push back on this rhetoric of red lines for Russia and this and that, but I think they're looking too small time. They're not looking at Russia's allies, what could be then used as proxies from the allies for these strikes into then to NATO, the adversary countries here, either that could strike NATO or could strike countries friendly to NATO as well. Now, typically the countries we're talking of here is Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China, named by some intelligence groups as well as the axis of upheaval. Now, what I think the red line here the US may be concerned about is not Russia increasing the red line and strikes into Europe because of storm shadows or using a nuclear bomb inside Ukraine. That's not going to happen from a storm shadow or an ATACMS. I think what the US is concerned about is this pushing Russia? And they go, okay, we're going to give the Iranians a bit more technology on X anti-ship weapon system, and then next thing we're seeing that be used maybe in Israel, or we're seeing it used by the Houthis, or we're seeing whatever other web of control that then comes out of there. It's not exactly just, oh, they're going to bomb Warsaw. No, you need to look much further back out at where the US and Russia have interest. Now, we hear this again and again. Russia can move troops out of Ukraine and it can end today. Of course, that is true. But again, that is not going to happen without military action or diplomatic action at this point. And I don't think there is diplomatic action that would make that happen at this point. It has to be purely militarily. That type of rhetoric, what Putin is saying, is incredibly dangerous, but it's not new. Should we expect any announcements about the president's supply for munitions being used inside Russia? I wouldn't expect any big announcement today. There's a wide range of conversation about the Indo-Pacific, Ukraine, obviously the Middle East, and so I'll just leave it there. And our policy certainly hasn't changed. So certainly there is no change then around the policy of those long-range strikes. And this would be incredibly disappointing to Zelensky as well. Set to leave Washington without approval for the storm shadows. John Kirby, spokesman for the US National Security Council, no announcement on long-range missiles after the meeting, although they did not rule out at a later date. But it will come as a disappointment to leave empty-handed. Now, again, the UK can do this without the US, but again, they will want the US involved, US and its technology from satellite imagery, data, all of this, and of course, to show where both countries are lying on the approval of weapon systems. They probably don't want something like this occurring. Biden is reportedly holding back on supplying US-made ATACMS missiles for the country's equivalent to the Storm Shadow for fear of escalating the war. The Putin's comments is not something that we haven't heard before. There's no change in our view of the provision of these. For all the reasons we have said before, I can't speak for the British and the French. Now, one of the reasons that has also been thrown around too is the actual effect of these weapon systems and the range for the military air bases that sit within that may not have great effect either, as we have seen the US say that 90% of those aircraft have moved out of range of those anyway. Peskov on Friday, Kremlin spokesman, said Putin's message on the red line was unambiguous. We have no doubt the statement has reached its recipients. And we see this through the pro-Russian pages are saying, well, finally they're listening to our red lines. Russia's UN ambassador warned separately that letting Ukraine use long-range weapon system would plunge NATO in a direct war with a nuclear power, what no one wants. John Bolton, the former national security advisor, has said it would be extremely unusual to invite a British Prime Minister to the White House to say no to him. If the answer was no, that would have been delivered some other way. He said the move, if it happened, was essential, but would have been better 2.5 years ago. And this is something we see again and again. A lot of this is too little, too late. Now, here we see Zelensky through Kiev Independent talking then about ATACMS. ATACMS in the form of what we have today is pointless if you cannot use it on the Russian military bases, airfields, with helicopters and airplanes. It's pointless. So if they can't do that, the ATACMS is pointless. If ATACMS has a big restriction to the use of missiles because there are so few of them, unfortunately, it doesn't work. So, of course, there's also restrictions and also a limited just quantity of ATACMS given. He emphasised the need for more 155 and 122 arty shells. We've started to produce the 155mm, this is the NATO standard shell, but this is not enough for the full-scale war. You can see that even the production volumes of the whole of Europe are not enough to close this gap for such a large-scale land war. This is incredibly, incredibly scary for Europe and the West. What is happening in Ukraine and Russia within occupied territory of Ukraine or back into Kursk? It is a large-scale war of two countries. It is nowhere near the scale of a world war or a multinational war sitting somewhere in the world. And what we have seen is our industrial capacity and the production of the shells is so low that it's struggling to keep up with this war. What happens if other fronts from other countries opened up now? It's going to be so far behind. And your more authoritarian states, North Korea, China, Russia, are out producing significantly on those dumb weapons. Now, this is what I wanted to talk about with Iran and read of Joe Biden's meeting with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. That today, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK and the White House, the leaders in depth discussing, reaffirmed unwavering support of Ukraine, although they won't sign off on those weapons, expressed deep concern about Iran and North Korea's provision of lethal weapons to Russia and the People's Republic of China's support to Russia's defense industrial base. Here we go. Speaking about that axis of upheaval, they speak about the workings between Iran and North Korea and China. They condemned Iran-backed Houthi attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. This is where you can see where there might be some concern of shit if we have the red line cross, say, in Ukraine. It's not that Russia may launch something on Europe or launch something in Ukraine new. If Russia had a conventional capability, it could spin up to make a huge change in Ukraine. It would have done that already. It would have done that 18 months ago, but okay, they're tiptoeing when it comes to Iran. What if it's just like, oh, these Caliber cruise missiles, here you go, changes things where, of course, the US has interest in the Middle East. Now, they're likely, like I said in this, there won't be some great state war just due to the cost of man and machine in a huge, say, even conventional or the likelihood of that conventional war becoming a nuclear war and nuclear strikes once one side in war gets desperate. So as we've said, that future wars will likely be fought via proxies. And this is nothing new. The last great state war was World War II. Since then, we've seen many proxy wars. Look at a few. The US funding the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, or the Soviets supplying military aid to North Vietnam to fight then the Americans and the Australians within Vietnam. And we're going to see more of this into the future as great state nuclear state wars become just impossible. And Iran, its contractors and proxies, because there is a difference with both the Sunni and Shia Muslim groups that are then that come out of the IRGC as well. But this is a good example of this. Their supply through Russia to have effect in other areas of the globe. And I think this is one of the main things that the US is concerned about with crossing red lines. Now, there is actually another theory floating around that has been floating around for a good couple of years, is that China is actually somewhat using Russia as a sort of large-scale proxy, with Russia working and fighting inside of Ukraine, that China's two largest military competitors in the world as far as industry and manpower is NATO and Russia, both of which have expended huge amounts of weapon reserves and Russia manpower inside of Ukraine, whilst China has gained all the experience from outside looking in, has expended virtually zero munitions like both Russia and the West and NATO have, and of course has had zero losses like Russia, that China will actually be put in a far better position than any other state after this war. And of course we see with North Korea that Russia and North Korea and China and North Korea are building more and more relations here of North Korea. This is from Russian media here. North Korea's Kim Jong-un allowed relations with Moscow is rapidly developing with a meeting with Shoigu that happened yesterday. Also, North Korea, I believe, yesterday tested a new multiple launch rocket system. It's very similar to like a Tornado S. So again, there's probably some technology going back there. Russia gets dumb weapons, tech goes the other way. This is one of the things the US is concerned about. The US isn't just looking at the frontline border on 300 Ks forward and back of the zero line in Ukraine. They're looking everywhere from Africa to Asia to Europe to South America, bloody everywhere, for rapidly developing in various spheres, politics, economy, and culture, expanding cooperation with Russia in a spirit of comprehensive strategy and partnership. And then we see from the 9th of September, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, People's Republic of China, to do with North Korea, continue bilateral relations, strategic and long-term perspective, deepen strategic communication, and strengthen coordination with the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. I think that democratic is a stretch, but they consolidate and develop traditional friendly and cooperative relations between the two countries. So further ties being put together there as well. So people often talk about nuclear weapons in this as the red line. And I think people don't understand the mutually assured destruction. No such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. There's small and large yield. Every nuclear weapon, from one that would blow up your backyard to one that will blow up a city, is strategic. Its element of use is purely strategic. Now, this is someone who should know better than this, and this post has been going viral. Jake Bro, and a fellow YouTuber here, he's a former nuclear and missile operations officer with the US Air Force. And this is a video he put up here. If Russia uses nuclear weapon against NATO territory, then this is what will happen to Russia in response. 45 million Russians will be vaporized in the first hour, not much of a life remaining for the other 100 million. Maybe the people of Russia should stop supporting Putin and de-escalate the conflicts. Now, what this is doing, though, and he knows better than this, is it's only giving a half of the equation. At best a half. If you include China and India, it's giving a third or a quarter of that equation. What needs to be remembered in this is Russia has the largest deliverable nuclear arsenal in the world. They have around 5,200 warheads, and about 1,600 to 1,700 are actually deployed, ready for delivery. So they're actually deliverable here and now. And at the end of the decade, China plans to have 1,000 deliverable warheads. So what this is assuming is that Russia has one nuke that goes off and goes pop, and then the US flood the Russian Federation. Now, of course, the US can flood the Russian Federation with nuclear weapons. What about the other way? Again, this is what we've spoken about, that it's going both ways. This is the mutually assured destruction. The nuclear powers have come together and gone, we all have enough shit to end the world multiple times over. So yes, 45 million would be vaporized in the first hour, and it would be shit for the other 100 million. What do you think happens in the EU? What do you think happens in America? What do you think happens in Australia? And I guess China would get involved in this as well. We need to talk about nuclear weapons as well. That nuclear weapons reduce the likelihood of war, but they gigantically magnify its ferocity if war were to occur. This is why I don't think we'll ever see a great state nuclear armed war. But we need to talk then about China as well, as Kissinger, and in line with what then the evil prick of Mao has said is interesting about China. So let's look at what Mao actually then said. The atomic bomb is a paper tiger which the US reactionaries use to scare people. It looks terrible, but in fact isn't. Mao implied that even if a significant portion of China's population were killed in a nuclear attack, the country would still endure due to its size. In one instance, he suggested that while hundreds of millions of Chinese might die, there'd still be hundreds of millions left to rebuild the nation. And what Mao was sort of on about is, if we have 1 billion people, you kill 500 million, we still have 500 million left. Just by its size is further protected there, rather than if you've got 140 million Russians and 50 million die, you're left with 100 million or US on the other side of this. That just the population size puts China in a better position than these other countries. Now, I'm not going to speculate too much on if that is true or not, but it is an interesting thought experiment to then think through. When speaking in Moscow to an international conference at a Communist Party leaders in 1957, Mao shocked fellow delegations by predicting that in the event of nuclear war, China's more numerous population and hardier culture would be the ultimate victor, and even casualties of hundreds of millions would not deflect China from its revolutionary course. So it is an interesting beast to think about in there, but things like this is acting as if Russia has a single nuclear warhead and the other countries that are nuclear armed have a single warhead either. No one wants this. And if you look at someone like John Mearsheimer, I know I've quoted him before in saying this, he will say that even if Russia were to use a nuclear weapon inside of Ukraine, the US would not respond with a nuclear weapon. And his justification for this theory is, if Russia drop a nuclear bomb, if we are to respond in a nuclear fashion, not conventional, but nuclear, we are accepting the loss of hundreds of millions throughout Europe and the US, as well as the loss of tens or hundreds of millions across Asia as well. And that the US strategic planners will not push that button for that, even if it were to occur inside of Ukraine. That's something you can talk about in the comments. Legends, have a great day. Look after yourself, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.